Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times, welcome to my channel, welcome to a little bit of Sins of Solar Empire 2. So today we're going to be talking about the Serevun Overseer, which is the main support ship, I guess, the primary support ship, the default support ship for the Vasari. They actually have another one, similar to how Advent have two. This one is the one that reduces damage though, so I think it's a little bit closer in spirit to the Hoshiko or the Iconis. So the Serevun Overseer, let's go over its stats here. 210 durability, so it's still pretty easy to hunt down with something like a regular frigate there. 915 shield points, 1080 armor points, 1640 hull points, and 350 antimatter. This thing is actually very, very survivable for what it is. That's a lot of hit points on its total there. Still not as much as an Iconis, though, but still very, very good at surviving battle there. Got a armor strength of 72, and a maximum speed is only 660, which is actually really bad for this class of ship. So as far as abilities go, you've got Intimidating Presence, which is what you're actually going to be using this for. Cooldown of 40 seconds, antimatter cost 75, and it reduces weapon damage in an aura. You can actually see the radius here. So pretty decent aura for 15% for 20 seconds. So you would have to have two of these to have 100% uptime. And the reality is you need way more than two of these for 100% uptime here. What will happen with these is, if your opponent is paying attention, is this thing's going to get shot down fairly quickly. And once it gets shot down, it's no longer providing that buff. So you're going to have to use another sort of an Overseer. And you're just going to have to keep cycling them in as they get sort of destroyed. However, if you sort of look at it in conjunction of a couple different things here, the fact that it has a lot of hit points, it's fairly survivable, means that you can sort of run one into the enemy. You can activate Intimidating Presence. As one is about to get destroyed, you run another one in and have it activate Intimidating Presence, and then so on and so forth. If you have a couple of these guys on sort of standby at all times, you can sort of continue doing this. It's the same as like your other ships going in there and tanking and getting destroyed. Like, these guys will get destroyed instead of your other ships, is basically what I'm saying. So it's kind of fine. The only problem is, like, how many do you build to sort of sacrifice to that? Because once you run out, of course, you're not going to get the benefit of Intimidating Presence. In large-scale battles, this is actually the best damage mitigation per ship. It doesn't stack, so having like a whole bunch of them all run in and activated all at the same time is no good, but having like just one activating this at all times can swing a battle just radically in your favor if your opponent is not paying attention. If they are paying attention, what's going to happen is that you're going to lose the Serevun Overseer very, very quickly because it's a larger scale battle. So at a certain threshold, when these things are getting like one shot, they stop being useful, and you do actually have to fly in like 5 of them at a time and have them all activate this. They're kind of a nightmare to activate properly, because if you just sort of auto-casting them, they'll sort of just all cast Intimidating Presence at weird times, and then you have to like either have a bunch of them deactivated, or you have to sort of find some way to desync their castings. Still, it's a very, very powerful debuff for a generic cruiser, one that's sort of like stronger in some ways, and in that it's hitting many, many, many ships, reducing all their damage by 15%, whereas like the Iconis is only having the damage of like a small number of on a small number of targets that you have. The Hoshiko is only sort of mitigating the damage on a small number of targets. So it really is kind of like really strong, but very difficult to use properly, and it's very easily counterable, is what I'd say. I do think that it's worthwhile just having maybe a couple testing to see if your opponent is not going to actually block Intimidating Presence. But the problem is, this is almost always going to be like a fairly easy to spot ship there. It's got a fairly distinct outline, and it's not going to be something that you have a whole bunch of, and it's going to be running straight into the middle of the enemy formation. Whereas most of your other ships will not be running straight into the enemy formation. So it's pretty easy to pick out there, and it will actually get naturally focused fired if your opponent's not paying attention, because it will be the ship that's sort of in the middle of their formation anyway. So as for upgrades, this thing doesn't really have any natural upgrades for its combat abilities, but it does have a couple upgrades that help it. Mobile phase detection is its second ability. All this does is it tells you when you've got enemies coming into this ship's star lane. So what it would tell you is, like, if you've got things that are up here that are trying to warp down into here, you'll actually be able to see them ahead of time that they're coming into here. And that's actually kind of useful information to have, but that doesn't give you a lot of time to prepare anything. Improved phase lane detection is where it's kind of at here. It'll let you know from 2 jumps away. So what would happen is, if your opponent was, say, over here, they're jumping to here and then to here, you'd be able to see them going to here. and that gives you way more time to like sort of move your stuff into position. If you're like in the opposite end of like a gravity well, and you've got that mobile phase detection, it can help you to know that they're on their way, so that you can move your ships to like a good position, whether it be like right up here so that you can attack them right away, or you can move them like to the back. This is also the like sort of late game scout reconnaissance ability for Vasari to like see things incoming, to see what angle you're being attacked from. Whereas, like for Advent, it's a passive thing related to their culture. This is how like Vasari do that. It's arguably worse than Advent's, but it's still something at the very least there. For tech, I think they follow trade routes. In any event, though, it's an okay ability. I think that to some extent, this is actually what probably keeps the Serevun actually viable. Because if it was just intimidating presence, I probably would actually just say you could ignore these to a certain extent. I think you can ignore them. But having a couple of them loitering around just for like reconnaissance purposes on your sort of like in places where you'd be able to detect as a result of having this, that's very nice. And then once you do that, you can just sort of throw it into the meat grinder, have it use intimidating presence once, and then probably explode. But that during that time where it's doing that, they're still providing some use. As far as our cost goes, these things are like pretty expensive. It costs 8 supply and 220 metal and 350 crystal. This is kind of an excessive amount of crystal, in my opinion. You're paying a lot for these guys, but if you have got a bunch of that pooled up, then having a couple of these in a fight can make a big difference. I think to a certain extent, almost like these would be better if you were combining them with a lot of Corvettes, because those will actually get into close range with the enemy ships, making it so that maybe if your opponent's not paying attention, they won't go after your Serevun Overseer. But I think that in most situations, these things will just get focused fire down really, really quickly. Still, very, very powerful effects, pretty decent overall as far as that goes. For other abilities, you do have, of course, all of your tanking abilities. Those are going to be the ones that you sort of want on these guys. Nano hull plating is, of course, going to give you like those maximum hull points. This has got very good maximum hull points. You are going to get focused fire down with this ship. You're not going to have a bunch of them lying around, and they're probably going to take focused fire. They're not going to just like receive a few incidental hits. So things like reinforced nanite conduits are not going to be as good for the ship as it is with other ships there. Reintegration as well, because that's not going to be as useful. It's still good, though. You have got enough hit points that you could potentially recharge some in smaller scale fights in particular. Atomic engineering, I do think that this helps a little bit. It's a fairly slow ship, and you may want to get it into the middle of the enemy fleet. This could allow you to reposition a little bit better, and of course, armor strength and armor value is always nice to have. Again, for the shield recharge, it's not necessarily the best on this particular ship. Same with the shield burst if you're playing as Vasari Alliance. But it is nice to be able to do that in some circumstances early on in the game where you're not going to die immediately. But just the shield percent bonuses are probably better for this. They are also not strong enough, though, to make it like so that you're much, much more survivable. Basically, this is one of the few ships for Vasari where I would say the regenerative ability is just really not that good, but the flat values are very, very strong because you've got such good flat values of armor and shields and hull. So for Empire Research, there's nothing really in here that's going to help you tremendously. The build speed bonus that you get from Vasari Alliance from your culture really is not necessarily that meaningful, so I wouldn't worry too much about that as far as they go. This is basically just a ship that you're going to want to look into using, but I think actually the more useful ability for it is its reconnaissance ability rather than its innate sort of combat ability there. So, yeah, that's basically everything about this. There's not a whole lot to talk about it. I guess we could talk a little bit, actually, about the phase resonance stuff here. So, this is the first ship that we're talking about that actually benefits from the utility tree here. I would not really get that for this. You're not going to be, like, blowing through your antimatter so quickly that you need the reduced antimatter cost. Even though it can get to fairly high values. The ability cooldown, again, it's synced perfectly so that just having 2 of them it is exactly enough. And you're probably going to die before you get multiple casts off anyway, even if you've got the better ability cooldown, even 36%. So it probably doesn't matter by the time you get to this point that you could get this. So I would say that none of this really matters here. The mobility tree kind of matters a little bit. Being able to move at a faster speed will let it get into the middle of the enemy a little bit easier, more reliably, and then cast its ability. So that does help. Obviously, combat is not going to help you at all with this thing. What it really needs, what this ship needs, is some sort of like phase resonance ability that gives it supreme durability for a brief period, but that doesn't really exist. So it's forced to sort of run in there and sort of like hope that it survives your opponent, sort of focus firing other things there. But it is definitely a very, very, very good target to go after using something like your disciples or something like that. Now, you could, on the other hand, just sort of like rotate this in your head and think that you're going to get as many Serevun Overseers as you would get things like Iconus Guardians. Because you get like dozens of Iconus Guardians. Like, you get quite a lot of those. And if you get that many Serevun Overseers, like killing all of them it's a fairly lengthy process, and you're not likely going to be able to do that quickly. But you could lose like all of them, and it would still be like quite a ways into the fight before you actually get rid of them all. So that could be a way to think about it in terms of like cost effectiveness, because the Iconus Guardian is also not like bringing anything to the fight. But you're really getting diminishing returns when you got a whole bunch of Serevun Overseers, because more Guardians does actually provide more defense to your fleet. It makes it so that the effect of the Iconus Guardians is stronger. Having more Hoshikos does make the healing effect stronger. It makes it so that you're less likely to lose ships in that engagement. It does mean that more of your ships are capable. None of the stuff the Serevun Overseer does, like the phase lane detection doesn't stack, the intimidating presence doesn't stack. So you're really getting a lot less benefit from it. But you could just think of it as that's the tax you have to pay for that really powerful minus 15%. But even then, when you think about like that sort of sense there, when you have like a dozen Iconus Guardians, it's not like a couple ships are getting that 50% damage mitigation. It's like your entire fleet is getting that at that point in time, and that 50% damage mitigation at that point in time is way stronger than the 15% attack reduction that the Serevun Overseer is getting. So you kind of have to like really gauge what you're willing to pay to get the effect of the Serevun Overseer. I think it's a fairly decent ship, but again, it's not going to be something that you can easily use. I think there's got to be some like tricks to using it effectively, and I can't really think of what those would be. So in any event, though, that's going to be our video for today. Hope you found this one enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.